Making a classic Bolognese sauce takes a little patience, but boy is it worth it. It does take a little time, but it's really easy. The first thing we're going to do is get a nice Dutch oven on the stovetop. A Dutch oven is a little wider than a stock pot, and that gives us great surface area. I'm going to turn this cast iron Dutch oven on to about medium heat. Now the first thing I'm going to do is sweat or saute our vegetables. Vegetables? Classic mirepoix, which is onion, celery, and carrots. When I think about whether I want to start a recipe using oil or butter to saute my vegetables, I think about the recipe in its entirety and what other ingredients I'll be adding later. If I'm adding dairy later, and I'm adding some milk to this later, I'm probably putting a little cheese on, then I want to start with some butter. Butter burns at a relatively low temperature, but if I add some oil to that, I can bring that temperature up so the butter won't burn, and I get the benefit of having the flavor of the butter as well as the olive oil. We're just going to cook these veggies until they start to soften. That'll be probably anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes. So once your vegetables have started to get softer, then we're going to add some herbs to this. I'm going to just put some fresh thyme sprigs in here and let those cook with the vegetables. Now traditionally there are no herbs in a Bolognese sauce, but we can be flexible. Add a little thyme, add a little oregano if you want to. The next step is adding the meat. Now in this Bolognese, we're going to do 2 parts of beef and 1 part of pork. The pork really mixes this up a little bit, gives it a little variety, adds some more flavor, but if you want to go with just all beef, that's fine too. We're going to cook this meat, both of them together, breaking them down with a wooden spoon into smaller chunks until you see no pink left. So once there's no more pink left in this beef and pork, you're going to find some fat has rendered out of the meat. So you can decide how much you want to leave in there. You can leave it all, you can leave barely any. I recommend leaving about 2 tablespoons. So I'm just going to pull that meat to one side and drain off some of this grease. Now the next step is to add milk to your Bolognese. We're going to pour this in and let it be by itself in this pot with the meat. What it's going to do is sweeten that pork a little bit. It's going to counteract the flavor of the wine, which is coming in next. But remember, milk is actually acidic, so it's going to help break all the meat fibers down and make this super tender and delicious. We're going to leave the milk in there, simmering until it's almost all gone. It'll take about 10 minutes. Once the milk is almost entirely evaporated and you can't really see it on the bottom of the pan anymore, it's time to add the next ingredient, which is white wine. Now, wine is important for this dish just because some of the flavors you're going to be putting in here are alcohol soluble, so they give their flavor off when you add alcohol. Now, the alcohol is going to boil off, so it's not going to stay in your Bolognese, but those flavors will really blossom. Traditionally, you add white wine to a Bolognese, although that may seem counterintuitive. If you only have red wine on hand, no problem, use red wine instead. We're going to stir and simmer this wine in here again until it's almost evaporated, so about another 10 minutes. Once the wine has almost evaporated and been absorbed by the meat, we're going to add a little tomato. Now, tomato is not traditionally in a classic Bolognese, but time has gone by, most people like it, we're going to add it. Once we've stirred this in, we're going to let this simmer for a couple hours. That's where the patience comes in. But it really does pay off because all of these flavors will blend together and form a sauce. A sauce made of meat. That's what Bolognese is, a meat sauce, not a sauce with meat in it. It's not a marinara sauce that has ground beef added, it's a meat sauce. So resist the temptation to add any kind of liquid like stock. We're just going to use the tomatoes. We're going to simmer it partially covered and let some of that moisture evaporate. One last step before we leave it for a couple of hours, we're going to season it with a little bit of salt and pepper. Not too much salt because ultimately in the end, we're going to add a little Parmesan cheese here as well, which is also salty. And now we let it simmer. So 2 hours later, our Bolognese is probably ready. If at any time while it's simmering for these 2 hours, it becomes a little too dry when you run your spatula through, you don't really see it fill the gap, you can add a little water, only a half a cup at a time. Stir that in, but make sure that water evaporates before you're ready to serve your sauce. We're about ready. I'm going to turn the heat off and season it. It's really tender, really delicious. All the flavors have blended nicely. It just needs a little final seasoning up, salt, a little pepper. And when I stir this, I can actually see the bottom of the pan. That's what we want. We want a sauce made of meat, not a saucy meat mixture. Mmm. Delicious. A plate of pasta. A spoonful of Bolognese on top. And then we can dress it with a little Parmesan cheese. A little parsley. And it may have taken a little time, but it was really easy, and it's so delicious.